Hello, FC Dallas Curious fans. This is Buzz Carrick. Welcome to Third Degree, the podcast. This is a bonus episode 62 that we weren't expecting to have. Last week's episode with our good friend Kevin Lindstrom, when we were discussing the history of FC Dallas from 2010 to 2014, ended up being a near hour and 50 minutes of content, which I just felt like was too much to ask for anybody to sit through in one listening. Not that I don't think it was good content, because I do. So I decided to divide it into half and give you two pieces. And last week was part one, which encompassed the years 2010 to 2011. And now we're going to start here in the middle of what was essentially one big longer podcast, but I'm now dividing into two pieces. And this is going to be the years 2012 through 2014. If you enjoyed last week's podcast and this week's podcast, perhaps you could consider supporting us at patreon.com/third degree. This is an ad-free podcast, and we'd like to keep it that way. We hope you'd like to support us. Overall, this is the fourth section of our history, and this is part two of that segment, years 2012 to 2014 with Kevin Lindstrom. We hope you enjoy. Here we go. All right, so for 2012, not surprisingly, between the busted 2011 draft and between the busted Dax McCarty expansion draft and everything else that happens in terms of moves that season, it's no surprise that Barry Gorman gets let go. And Fernando Clavijo is brought in as his replacement. Now, at the time, I, in particular, was a little concerned based on Clavijo's track record as an MLS coach. I don't know how you felt about him coming in as a technical director.
I'm torn. As we found out later, there were issues with traffic, which is where he was coming from.
There's always issues with traffic.
But at the same time, he certainly had connections. And whether it was his time with Haiti or his time with Colorado or his time as a player, you know, the technical director, general manager, whatever that position is, their job is to find things other people don't. My concern was he was just going to bring in players that he knew and had contacts with, rather than whether they were a good fit or not. But then again, you know, he also did have enough contacts that some of those players were going to be good. And I think it played out that way. He brought in some players that really made a difference. He also brought in some players that really didn't.
There's a couple solid moves this winter. Scott Seeley is not a horrible bring. Nope. Brought Hernan Petrus is solid. Carlos Rodriguez is solid. None of those are spectacular. They're solid. The big move for 2012, and this is a big move, is the signing of Blas Perez, which is who is the most pure classic 9 high striker we've ever had. Pure target center forward.
And hands down, one of the most competitive players to have ever played for the team. He was never going to leave an inch to anybody if he could help it.
Yeah, very physical, very commanding of attention, which is a big part of being a 9, is to draw the center back attention, demand the focus of the defense. He had all the tools to be a prototype 9. By the time the MLS draft rolls around, FC Dallas only has one pick left. It's the 11th pick overall, and they use that.
But they made it count.
Yeah, they use that pick on Matt Hedges, and they throw him right into the fire, and he starts 23 games. So with one pick, and you get Matt Hedges, that's a good draft.
Absolutely. I mean, by that point in time, really, you only had one, frankly, even a half round of depth. So, you know, you had to be top half, and you had to make it count, and it probably needed to be a center back or a defensive midfielder.
11th overall for him too, and you're talking about a guy that a decade later is going to be the number one player in this club's history in terms of minutes and starts and games and everything you could ever possibly want. One of the best draft picks in history, no question.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right, there's some other young quality players around this season. Fabio Castillo is starting to emerge. Breck Shea is the club's only all-star in 2012. Jackson's having a pretty solid season. But unfortunately, one of the reasons Hedges played so many games as a rookie is the defense starts to fall apart. They went from 2010, the best defense in club history. Now it's 2 seasons later, And Ugo Iamolu, his career ends 10 games into the season with concussion.
Yeah.
George John, the injuries are just starting to catch up with him and pile up. Nothing specific, at least like in terms of a specific event where like he was out after that, but he only plays 19 games, starts 19 games, and Hedges as a rookie plays 23. And Hernan Petrus, who's a young player too, ends up starting 24. So really the signs are showing that the defense is in trouble in 2012. Now, his big problem ends up being in his knee, but it was just, that's what I mean by with George. It wasn't like it was one moment like Ugo with the concussion. It was just a bunch of stuff with George that was starting to pile up, and his minutes were starting to become limited.
Yep, absolutely. And, I hated it for him as a person because I again, worked for the team. I did get a chance to do events with him, that kind of stuff. One of the nicest guys out there. I remember there was one time we were doing an event. I can't remember if it was for the adult co-ed or adult women's league. I can't remember. But you would think in a scenario like that, a professional player, might not kind of get stuck in. It's a lot easier to get kids excited about playing soccer. The dynamic's a little bit different with adults, but man, he rolled with it and he made sure that team, those players had a really good time.
No question, he's a great guy. But the fact that they drafted Hedges before this shows that they were already worried about his longevity. They didn't foresee Ugo's concussion problem, obviously, but with those two guys and the way the season was going, thank goodness they drafted Matt Hedges.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think your challenge is Ugo was long in the tooth. I don't know if that's necessarily the best phrase, but I mean, at that point, Ugo, a lot of miles on his game. Maybe they had an idea that George was maybe similar to Heath Pierce in terms of erring on the side of trying to take care of himself as opposed to fighting through injuries. I
don't think so with John. I mean, I think it was just the piled up, like how often he was getting hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, because although at the same time, 27 or 28, even though he played a lot, obviously.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, Ugo's minutes are, I mean, he was battling players like Connor Casey almost every game. And that was
a lot of beatings.
Yeah. And I mean, he gave as good as he got. And he won most of his battles. But that does, wear on you. Right. And then when you throw in the concussions, I mean, that was one thing that if I really wish MLS would have gotten ahead of a lot sooner.
Concussion protocol. Yeah.
Yeah, concussion protocol, and I mean, because that had an issue with Zach. Obviously Dave Wagenfuhrer. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple people, but
I'm sure there were more.
Yeah. So,
well, aside from the amount of goals they're giving up, 2012 is also not a good Open Cup year run. In fact, this is one of the worst Open Cup upsets. We've talked about Shells not caring about the Open Cup. Mm-hmm. This is one of the worst Open Cup histories in club history, when they are upset in the first round by the Charlotte Eagles. Before you ask who the Charlotte Eagles are, that's a PDL team, which is the 4th division. That's basically semi-pro college players. Now, Zach Lloyd and George John both left during the first half with injuries, and Jackson got red carded early. But still, when you lose 2-0 to a Charlotte Eagles PDL side, that is not a good Open Cup. Again, Shellis, I just don't think ever cared about the Open Cup.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that game being Shellis putting kind of a mix of kids and veterans. And then all of a sudden he had 2 veterans out. And then he had Jackson just go absolutely crazy. Now, I'm trying to remember, was that red card to Jackson early or late? I want to say it was later.
I felt like it was early, but I don't actually have the minute mark. Maybe you're right. Maybe it was late in the game. Either way, you don't need to be getting a red card against the PDL team. And
no.
Especially when you've already lost Lloyd and John.
Yeah, and I mean, the incident itself was crazy. If I remember correctly, we were already down 2-0. We had already, it was very much a frustration foul. And it was frankly similar to what happened between Hartman and Henri, in that there was an issue with the goalkeeper. I think the goalkeeper was picking the ball up out of live play, and Jackson basically ran him over. And frankly, you got to give credit to the referee crew for getting in there and keeping it from becoming a brawl, because if I remember correctly, it was one of those things where if I was a player, and I'm not a fighter, right, and I'm not a very good player at all, but I would have been out there because it was just totally
Yeah,
off the
your
rails.
memory is
It wasn't.
amazing. I looked it up. It's a 78th minute challenge on keeper Clinton Irwin. So, well, look at you with your steel trap for a mine there, Kev.
Well, so just not to go too far down this road, but remember, I was stupid in 1994. I did not go to a single World Cup game.
Oh, that is
How
stupid.
crazy is that?
Yeah.
I had kind of gotten away from the
I
game.
went to 3.
Yeah, I had gotten away from. I mean, understand, I was playing when I was young. I watched Fort Lauderdale Strikers games when I was a kid. So I was really into it. And then between the NASL dying and us moving to Austin, as opposed to being in Florida and California, which is where we had been beforehand, I just kind of drifted away from it. Then I go to A&M. I'm in love with sports as a whole, as Aggies are. I'm in journalism, so I'm writing about it. It was phenomenal. And then I had gotten an internship with the Temple Daily Telegram. I'm in the sports room talking with the guys about, this is the World Cup and this is the U.S. versus Brazil, and it would be a really big game to win, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't until I went home to visit a girlfriend at A&M, and she had something going on, and I was like, okay, so I need to find something to do. And there were some guys playing soccer, and I got back out it, and it was like somebody hit me over the head with a baseball bat. What have you been doing with your life? This is the sport you love, right? So right after that, you've got MLS comes back. I'm in law school, and then being a lawyer. This has been my life. Like when I'm not working, this was the thing that I did to keep myself sane. So, frankly, I'm really grateful to the sport and to the team, the players, the coaches, the staff, anybody who's helped make this a living, breathing thing. It's really important to me. So I really appreciate it. So if that's a long explanation as to why I remember why Jackson got a red card, I didn't remember the 78th minute thing, but I remember the foul. I remember that it was late and it was frustration. And frankly, this was one of the things that stuck out to me as a trend going forward, that this team got a lot of red cards. Jackson was one of them. Jair Benitez was one of them. Fabian. Some of them were random. Eventually, it was people like Javon Watson. But I remember thinking that there was a lack of composure from some players. And unfortunately, I love his competitiveness, but I think part of it was Blas Perez. He brings a level of confrontation that he could handle 99% of the time because he was a professional. He was a masterful player for Panama. He knew where that line was, and he knew how to push it just to the edge. There were other players on the team that maybe didn't know how to handle that, and there was nobody strong enough. There wasn't a Daniel Hernandez type personality.
We're going to come back to that.
Yeah, that could basically say, hey, that's not cool. You can't do that. So,
all right. The only bright side of 2012 is the David Ferreira comes back for a late season run. He's never quite the MVP level again, but he does notch 2 goals and 9 assists in just 16 games over the back half of the season. But when he comes back, their record is already 3-9-5, so the season is pretty much over. They do finish roughly just a little above 500 at 6-4-7, but he wasn't enough to turn the season around by himself.
No, but I remember that late push was pretty exciting. And there was one game that I think I don't remember if I've got it exactly right, but we had signed Julian de Guzman. The team was feeling like they had gotten into it. I can't remember if Julian was a trade or whatever, but there was a game, I want to say it was against Toronto, and he scored a cracker of a goal in stoppage time. And I want to say it was one of the best calls of Mark Followell's career. It just went viral. And I remember thinking, wow, maybe they can do it. It was one of those where the mathematical elimination was like hanging on by a fingernail. But that was one of the games that really stuck out to me that year.
You can tell that they knew the defense was a problem because of de Guzman coming in, as you mentioned. They also brought in James Marceline for only 6 games. But honestly, Hartman is starting to slow. Daniel Hernandez is starting to slow. Really, I think, Kevin, looking back, that we have to say that 2012 is basically the end of a cycle as much as anything. The peak in 2010 is now almost at the bottom. And it's almost time for a rebuild.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, we found out pretty soon that was true.
Yeah. Now, if you're looking for a signature win on that season, it's actually in July when David Ferreira returns. And they proceeded to put a 5-0 stomping on the Portland Timbers, which was marked by Ruben Luna netting 2 career goals in that game. So there's a homegrown player. There's a little bit of a water moment there when David comes back and they all get really excited.
Yeah, there definitely were some good moments that season. I remember being super excited for Ruben being involved in the team and, watching players like Brian Leyva try to find his way and that kind of stuff. To
say the least, Kevin,
back was great.
To say the least, Kevin, the season is going in the wrong direction. The club's going in the wrong direction. And they dropped to 6th in the West with just 39 points. That's a big fall off from 52 the season before. And they failed to make the playoffs for the 5th time in club history. Now, the most bizarre thing at the end of the season happens following the season. And that's when Daniel Hernandez retires to become he was already an assistant coach player. So he retires and they name him a full-time assistant coach. And 3 weeks later, they fire him and he ends up suing the team for wrongful termination. And it's a gigantic, complicated mess. And I actually found some articles that talked about the court case. And it involves sponsorships and sportswear and promises of contracts. And he said, she said, and I did, and I didn't. And it's a giant soap opera. And it's one of the craziest things I've ever seen because he doesn't sue Schellas. He sues the team. And he is a lifelong Schellas lover. And yet it couldn't have gone south faster at the end of the season when he retired. Yeah, that was one of the, I would put that up with the Henri kick. That is just bizarre moment that just doesn't, it's like, really, is this how we're going to act? Is this how we're handling things? But, at the end of the day, there's a lot of things about the business of soccer that frankly needs to improve. And unfortunately, I think the team and Daniel got sideways in one of those moments. Now, in hindsight, we have said that 2012 really should have been the end of the cycle. 2013 should have been a rebuild. But instead, Schellas kind of goes for a refresh, and we'll break some of that down here. They draft Walker Zimmerman and Ryan Hollingshead. Neither of them has much of an impact in 2013, but both are solid picks. They sign Michel to be a left back, if you remember, although they still have Benitez at the time. Yeah. And he ends up playing a lot in the midfield because they signed Peter Lucine to replace Daniel Hernandez, and Peter proceeds to tear his ACL in the preseason. Yeah. So because of the consequences of that injury are large, because now Michel has to play a lot in the midfield. Kellen Acosta is a homegrown, and he starts to get some serious playing time because they're shorthanded in the midfield. They bring in Raul Fernandez as a goalkeeper because they let Hartman go because he's starting to slow down a little bit. They sign a Brazilian striker named Pipco or whatever. And they didn't even get out of spring training. They cut his ass 6 weeks later. They do bring in Javon Watson, who's a solid piece, a defensive piece, and Eric Hasley, Eric Hasley's okay. But the other crazy thing that happens is they finally choose to sell Breck Shea because Castillo is looking pretty good. But the two most interesting pickups of the whole offseason, it was a weird offseason. The two biggest pickups number one, Ramon Nunez comes back, and number two, Kenny Cooper comes back. So it's two guys, you can never go home again, right? Two guys that actually prove that to be true, because while we were excited to see them, neither one of those guys really worked out, did they? No, that was very much you're trying to lean one way, you're trying to lean the other. And, the Mr. Miyagi squished just like grape because you got stuck in the middle. No move really worked the way you wanted it to. Yeah. Well, let's be fair. This season doesn't work out. When you look at it on paper, though, I think at the time I felt it was pretty optimistic. I felt pretty optimistic because let's lay it out for you. Benitez, George John, Matt Hedges, Javon Watson is solid. Zach Lloyd is looking really good, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Boz Perez Kenny Cooper pairing should be really nice, right? They end up scoring.
In theory.
Yeah, in theory, they end up scoring 16 goals, which is not bad between them. And Hasley's not horrible as a late game sub, right? You've got Fabio Castillo's around. You got David Ferrer around. Jackson's still around. Michelle comes in, who seems okay. We loved Ramon when he was here before. Andrew Jacobson had been okay. And honestly, on paper, they start the season hot. They start 8-2-3, right?
Yeah.
Everything is going gangbusters, is it not, out of the gate?
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement. It seems like every move is leaning the right way. And unfortunately, it just can't last.
It goes to hell, doesn't it? That's a good way to put it. It goes to hell. And they finished the season, and I can't believe this. They finished the season 3-10-8 between June to October. 3 wins. And that includes, Kevin, a 13-game winless streak and a stunning 52 goals against, which is the third worst in franchise history. Now, I looked for a moment, for like a trigger, and I cannot figure out like an inciting incident. It's like this team drove off a cliff, and yet there's nothing specific that I can find. So what happened, my man? I have a theory, but I want to hear your theory first.
Well, so I think one of it was very much, I don't know if I'd call it Island of Misfit Toys, but you mentioned Ramon, you mentioned Kenny, you mentioned Michelle, who's supposed to be a left back and now is a midfielder. And
an 8.
What? I mean, he literally is like the inverse of Daniel Pinato, sorry.
Yeah.
Where you bring him in thinking he's going to be a defensive midfielder, and it's like, well, no, he kind of more plays defense in the midfield.
Yeah.
No, this is Michelle's, like, we can't put him anywhere else because he can't do the job. But man, he's got a magical left foot that can open a can, from 100 yards.
Might be the best free kick taker we've ever seen. I don't know. Jason Christ is up there too.
Jason Christ and Ronnie O'Brien are in that conversation.
Yep.
But yeah, you've Michelle, I think, is your 1A of that group.
All right, so here's my theory, Kevin, on 2013 and what went south. You've lost Daniel Hernandez, right?
Yes.
Your defense, we've already mentioned, is pretty banged up, okay? But specifically, there's no dominant 6. And you and I, and we talk about in this podcast all the time, the importance and the value of a 6. Now, you've lost your 6 on the field, but more importantly, you've lost your lieutenant in the locker room, your player coach, your guy that would kick you in the tail, your guy that kept everybody in line for Schellas. So there's a massive, massive leadership void. There's no one defining the coach's vision. There's no one distilling the coach's vision for the players and keeping everybody in tune. And with a coach like Schellas, who's a love-hate coach, that's a problem. And for me, this is what happens this season. And I think when you just get, as a club, without any player leadership, that Schellas wears out a locker room in a hurry.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I would say you can identify the teams in Major League Soccer that are going to be successful by their defensive midfielders, whether it's Kyle Beckerman or some of the other players. It literally is the most important position on the field, because if you have the right defensive midfield, you can kind of mix and match on your defenders behind them.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the place where this solidified for me was 2003 for the Dallas Burn, because I love Chad Deering as a person. He is a great guy. He's a good soccer player, right? But when you needed someone to stand in front of that defense and make sure that the kids behind him wasn't going to get crushed. And granted, you also expected Steve Morrow to be kind of leading the defense back there too. So, it's not all on Chad. Part of it was just the injury to Steve. But
weirdly, Kevin, I remember a 2002 and I remember a 2004. I don't remember a 2003. Was that was that a year?
Oh, it was a black hole that I'd love to forget. But at the same time, one of the things I learned early on, in 97 as part of that is your valleys are also defined by your peaks and vice versa. So I'm never going to try to forget a negative moment. It's one of those things where remember this so that when you have 2016, you can go, yes, this was worth it.
Well, by July of 2013, Hyman's starting to get a little desperate, and they make a couple of moves that don't really work out. One of them was the Brazilian Eck, who is, by the way, a holding midfielder, which just shows you that they knew what their problem was. Right. And bizarrely, in the middle of 2013, they bring in the guy that is essentially David Ferreira's replacement mid-season, and that's Morrow Diaz, who comes in and only plays 10 games and 5 starts over the back half of the season. But he does have 3 goals and 2 assists, so certainly there's some intrigue. And you may not remember this, Kevin. Morrow came in coming off of an injury, so there was some question about how quickly he'd be available or even if he would recover at all. I remember them thinking they weren't 100% sure he was ever going to get completely better. But it was a weird signing mid-season when David was still around.
Well, I remember in that season remembering that when it was clear Daniel wasn't going to be who he used to be, and that David was kind of losing his edge.
That's right. Fair. Yeah.
I remember seeing those two things and being worried. And I remember when they brought in Morrow. I do remember that. I do remember that he was coming off an injury. And I also remember when they brought him into games, it was almost a cup coffee type thing where it was sort of like, hey, get used to playing in this league. Just
exactly.
Kind of play, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't, hey, we're going to put responsibilities on you. It was just get used to being on the field in this league and see the speed and see the way the players play. And actually, just real quick to go back to it, I think Schellis's time in FC Dallas is defined by 2 clear situations. When he had Hernandez and when he didn't.
Yeah.
Before Daniel got there was 0 accountability.
Yep.
And, you had him putting all this reliance on people like Bruno Guarda. I mean, I feel for that guy because that was talk about an unfair position. But the talent was there, right?
Yeah.
And then Daniel came in. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you can follow that trend up, Kevin, through the history of this club when Colin Clark went out and got Simo to be his guy, right?
Yeah.
Schellis goes out and gets Daniel. Oscar goes out and gets Carlos Grezzo. Arguably Lucci just went out and got Thiago Santos. Coaches go out and I got to go get my 6. He's going to stand right here and he's going to lock down this locker room with leadership. It's the way all of them goes. And Schellis with Daniel was no different. And after he lost Daniel, he lost everything and lost the team and lost the locker room. Now, strangely, in the midst of all this meltdown, Schellis had his best Open Cup run he's ever had when they knocked off the Fort Lauderdale Strikers in round 1, owners of the best kits in U.S. soccer. They knocked off Houston Dynamo in 2. And they finally they lose to the Portland Timbers, but this is the best run by far of any of Schellis's Open Cup runs because we talked about how most of the time it seemed like he didn't care about the Open Cup until he was having a horrible season, and then he cared about it a little bit.
Right. I mean, hey, you'll see Major League Soccer teams kind of pick their poison, go, hey, is this a year we can make a run, or is this a team where we don't? I mean, what was it? Houston a few years ago was having an awful MLS season, but they ended up winning MLS Cup. DC United did the same thing.
The Open Cup, yeah.
So those things happen.
Yeah, if you're well out of it, you put your poison in the cup, I guess, and pour it all in there. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, the other thing that's frustrating is, and I remember this for a couple different reasons, the injury to Lucien really was a huge blow.
Killed the season.
Because, I mean, he easily could have been not just a replacement for Daniel, but a better version of him in terms of not even being able to get stuck in, not only the leadership, but just kind of the people that he knows and the respect he is given, even today where he's coaching in the different places where he's coaching.
Yeah.
If you take a look at where he's been and the people he's built connections with, man, he could have been something really special for FC Dallas. And it really killed both Schellis's time and, a lot of different things for the team. Yeah, that was a big.
That's the lesson of 2013 when you look back on it as a FC Dallas fan, is the value of the 6 and the importance of the 6. Now, that brings me, Kevin, to the most insane moment of 2013, and that comes in October. You get the joy of another insane moment, Kevin. These are fun. And that's the on-field fight between David Ferreira and Jackson at halftime of the Seattle Sounders game on October 19th. Now, I'm pretty sure this is a big part of why they did not pick up David's contract and why Jackson was traded over the winter. Because when you get in a fight with your teammate on the field in front of people. Now, fights happen in training and
Sure.
fights happen in the locker room. They happen.
Sure.
These guys are insanely competitive. But to have it walking off at halftime, that's no good for anybody. And it's not a surprise those guys were on their way out afterwards.
Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of what I meant in terms of, David had kind of lost his edge. And I think that was a kind of a sign of that, because up until that point in time, he had been a consummate professional. He was as competitive as Blas without doing some of the things that other people would consider to be dirty that Blas did. One of the most straight-laced players in terms of, I'm going to try to play honest. I'm going to try to play skillful. I'm going to play through the pain. I'm going to do everything I can for the team. And yeah, I think this was a moment where he was sort of like, you know what? I've done everything I can. I'm not getting anything out of this. I'm getting frustrated and I'm done. Right.
Well, after this season, the FC Dallas misses the playoffs for the second year in a row, but I believe it's only the sixth time in club history they'd ever missed the playoffs. Now, not surprisingly, perhaps, Schellas has had a 5-year run, so he resigns. This really is one of the poorest seasons in club history, other than obviously 2003. But and Coach Hyman left on a sour note. But let's put a bow on Hyman's time in Dallas. Sum up for me, if you can, distinctly. What did you think of Schellas as a coach?
So when we hired Schellas, I remember there were a lot of people saying, oh, he's just a college coach. And I remember thinking, yeah, but look at the college coaches that have had success in MLS and look at some of the challenges FC Dallas has had in MLS in terms of being competitive. Dallas Burn, FC Dallas, up until that point, had very much tried to be the skillful team, right? And we basically enjoyed doing that, and that was good. And it had some fun moments for the fans. But in terms of winning championships, it was the Bruce Arena team. It was the Peter Novak team. It was the hard guys that ended up winning championships. And here was a guy who arguably could have been the toughest coach MLS has ever seen. I mean, just
he was definitely tough, yeah,
and all that other stuff, right?
Yeah.
Videos of punters and blah blah blah, right?
Kicks in the balls.
Yeah, exactly. So, he had the opportunity to bring something really special to Dallas in terms of a competitiveness, using the athleticism that defined Major League Soccer for much of its career up until the 2010s, frankly, maybe 2015s, whatever. When now you have kind of a bigger universe of teams, et cetera. So I saw it as an opportunity. Frankly, I was a little frustrated he didn't move to get players like Ugo and Daniel on board sooner.
Yeah. Well, he tried to get Ugo for several years and ended up finally having to pay Drew Moore to get him. So it took a lot to get him because everybody liked Ugo, in Colorado.
Right. Oh, yeah. No, he very undervalued player, under-recognized for what he did because of his position. Same thing for Daniel. I mean, the leadership he brought to the team, even at his age, the fact that he was able to be as imposing at that stage in his career really spoke highly.
He had a monumental career before he even came here.
Yeah. And so, and I remember, I know this is before kind of the window we're looking at, but I remember the game in 2009, I want to say it was against Salt Lake, where Benitez and was it Fabian? I know it was Benitez and it was another player.
It wasn't Castillo. He didn't even come until much later.
No, you're right. Yeah, it wasn't Castillo, but it was another player that was like pure speed and athleticism. And he sprung them in the same game and they tore Salt Lake a new one. And I remember going, ooh, maybe he's figured it out.
Well, the other key player we lose at the end of 2013, Kev, is David Ferreira.
Yes.
One of the best players in club history, Mount Rushmore for me of this franchise. And that even is with him holding this season with a broken ankle. It's a shame the club never won something in his time.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, the team is littered with players who deserved better, whether it's Dave Vandenberg or, technically Jason Kreis won a championship, won a league MVP, but that's a player who deserved to win an MLS Cup. And David's definitely in that group. He deserved, hands down, that league MVP. And the fact that the next 3 years weren't more of the same is really frustrating and disappointing, both for him and for the team. Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. That brings us to 2014, and the Hunts throw a bag of money at Colorado and some picks, if I remember correctly. to pry FC Dallas legend Oscar Perea out of their hands. And strangely, despite the fact that I would have said, a whole season before it was time for a rebuild, Perea doesn't really gut the team right away. I think he probably came in with the idea of, I'm going to see what I got first, because they do get rid of some players, but they draft Tesho Akindele, which Oscar traded up to do because he had seen him play in college and locally there in Colorado and knew him. But Cooper's gone and Hasley is gone, and they bring in David Teixeira and Andres Escobar. Chris Seitz, who was already on the team, and Raul Fernandez is here. They sort of split time in 2014. This is what I mean about Oscar trying to feel things out and figure out what he has, at least initially. The midfield is kind of still in flux as Lucene is recovering. Stephen Keel is in town and playing a little bit. They bring in Henry Thomas. Morrow Diaz starts to become a bigger factor, and we're still trying to figure out who he is and what he has. Kellen Acosta really is emerging. And really, amongst all that flux, strangely or not, it's a homegrown player that was cut and brought back that's probably the most calming and consistent flavor that year, and that's Victor Ulloa.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the advantage that Oscar had that made it worth every penny the Hunts paid for him is not only did he know MLS and have the success of getting Colorado back in the playoffs, which was significant, but also he knew all the young players. So he knew Victor, he knew Kellen, that kind of stuff, to where he could say, you know what, Hasley, Kenny, we love you, but no. He was able to let go of some players and fill the gaps with other young players that he knew well enough. And Victor absolutely defines that knowing of the young talent and knowing where he could help things out. And frankly, the beginning of one of the best eras in FC Dallas history.
Now, the big blow on the defensive end is the loss of George John. Now, he's on the books in 2014, but he pretty much doesn't play at all or even train very much. And mostly it's because of his knee. And he never gets on the field again for this franchise or for any franchise for that matter. But, looking back, he definitely is. And he was in our top 5 defender center backs. He's one of the best defenders in club history. Leadership, quality guy, locker room guy, on-field leader, off-field leader. Really losing him, I think, was despite the fact that the club has moved on. Certainly, I still think that he was a player that lost his career, but way before he should have.
Absolutely. And he wasn't necessarily a Daniel Hernandez type leader, but he definitely was leader. A big presence to the team and to the fans in such a way that losing him, and not just losing him in the way that we did, not just that he couldn't play, but that it was weird. It didn't really make sense. There wasn't closure.
Yeah.
It was just this ugly glob of discontent and frustration and miscommunication. And is he ever going to play? What's going on? How many doctors have looked at him? What does it mean? Is he trying to get a passport to play in Greece?
Yeah.
I mean, there were just all these different weird pieces to it that were really awkward and frustrating. And a player that deserved to go out beloved by everybody didn't.
Yeah.
And frankly, the fact that didn't derail the season speaks very highly of Oscar and a lot of the other players.
Now, statistically, Kevin, I think I mentioned this when I talked about the beginning of the season, is that Oscar, I think, was searching for what he had to try and find players that he could rely on. And statistically, I can show this by saying, I went and counted, there were 23 players that played in 10 plus games that season, but only 2 of them played over 30, played the whole season. And that was Javon Watson and Matt Hedges. So basically, Oscar is shuffling through his entire roster, trying to figure out who can I count on and who I can't count on. And it really, in terms of lineup, was a season of complete chaos.
Right. Yeah, it was, I don't know if I'd call it chaos.
Lineup terms, it was chaos.
Okay. Yeah. That's true. But at the same time, to your point, Oscar had a system. He was working through his players and he'd give them enough of a run to see, hey, can you play? Can you do what I'm asking you to do? And is it enough? Answer yes, you stay. Answer no, okay, we're going to try someone else. Answer, we're not sure. Okay, we're going to try someone else, and then we may come back to you. So absolutely. I mean, and just the fact that he was trying to deal with the enigma that was Michelle. Again, I think he's one of the most awkward players the team has ever had in terms of, not that he was awkward as a player, but just in terms of his personality, his playing style. Where did he fit on the team? How can we find a way to take advantage of his talents, minimize his negatives, and make him a positive? He was always...
Well, he's a big part of the offensive explosion. This, Kevin, is actually the most offensive exploding season in club history, tied for the most with 55 goals, right? Blas Perez has 11. Castillo has 10. Michel, who we've been talking about, has 8. He's supposed to be a left back, right? And he's not. He's playing the midfield. He has 8 goals. Tesho has 7 and wins. We'll come back to him in a second. So FCD ends up with 55 goals for the year, tied for the most. What a crazy, fun season this is, even in the mix of Oscar trying to figure out what the heck's going on with all these players and who can I count on.
Absolutely. Well, the advantage he had is that he had figured out how to kind of defend his goal enough and basically say, hey, opposing defenses, we're going to run Fabio Castillo at you, and you need to be scared of him. And by the way, if you focus too much attention on him, Tesho Akindele is going to score. You have no idea who he is or what he does because there's no tape on him. And oh, by the way, this Panamanian guy, he's kind of good. And then, Michel put it in from wherever, whenever he wants, especially on free kicks. So good luck. It was a pretty amazing season in some ways. And frankly, I think Oscar did a phenomenal job of kind of setting the stage for what would be his team going forward.
Well, speaking of Tesho, one of the signature wins of the year is the 5-0 win in San Jose when Tesho has his hat trick. Pretty much, to be fair, this game wins Tesho Rookie of the Year.
Absolutely.
With whatever it was, a month or two left. One of the, honestly, was award aside, legitimately one of the best rookie seasons we've seen in the club history.
Oh, easily. And frankly, with as dangerous as Castillo was, and as unique a talent as Tesho brought to the table, because, no, he's not as awkward as Michel, but he definitely wasn't a target forward. He wasn't really a right winger. He wasn't really an off striker, but he could be effective in 3 of those roles depending on the game.
I still don't know what he is.
Right. And, the brilliance I think Oscar brought to the table was sort of like, okay, I'm going to look at what the other team's strength is, and I'm going to put Fabian in a place where they have to deal with him. And then I'm going to put, whether it's Tesho or Blas or Michel or whoever around that, so that whatever, vulnerability they leave me, they're going to gash him. And I think that San Jose game was a great example of that, because they had no idea how to deal with Tesho in that game. There's just no clue. And he just ran wild. It was beautiful to see.
Well, there's also a really good cup run in 2014 as Dallas beats the San Antonio Scorpions. Houston Dynamo, again, they love to beat the Dynamo in the cup.
Absolutely.
They knock off Colin Clark's Carolina Railhawks. That's actually harder to say than you would think, before they finally lose to the Philadelphia Union in the semis, when Blas Perez and Victor Ulloa, of all people, missed penalties, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Good cup run, though. Yeah. It was always nice to see Colin Clark's teams doing well. I still think firing him was one of the big mistakes this club's ever made, but
I don't disagree.
Yeah, solid cup run. So the team under Oscar, with this offensive explosion, they start the year 5-1-1, amazingly, including a 4-1 stomping of Dynamo. Always a great day. Yeah. Then they hit a rough patch through May, mid to early part of the season. But around the midseason mark, they start to get things figured out, as Oscar has now sifted through all his players and sort of gets a little more consistency going. And from June on, they go 11-5-3 and end up in 4th place. And I think we're all feeling really good about the signs here about which direction this team is heading. Do you not?
Oh, absolutely. Again, remembering where Oscar came from, having success in Colorado, which, when he got to Colorado, if I remember correctly, it was a dog's breakfast. It was not pretty. So the fact that he got them into the playoffs, both in terms of where the team was and the resources he wasn't given.
Yeah.
Okay. Him coming to Dallas, people were like, ooh, the Hunts have already invested in Shellis. Now they're investing in Oscar. After Oscar built the development academy, and I mean, obviously it's not just because of him, but there was one signature moment of Oscar Pereira as a coach that I remember. I was working late, I was leaving, and I was watching him teach Brian Leva how to receive a ball with somebody on your back. Simple thing, but just watching the way he taught a young player and realizing all the different things he knew about all these different players that were now professionals for him. Again, back to your point earlier about Victor being a great example of the season, is here's someone who has the ability to coach, has the ability to inspire, is one of those coaches that you love playing for. Everything was on up and up. We knew coming into the season that there were some pieces missing, but we knew he was going to get more out of the team than anybody else we had seen in a while. Love Shellis. He was successful, but he never was one to – he wasn't the Bear Bryant. He can take his –
wasn't a teacher.
And he can't take yours and beat his, right? He wasn't the guy who was going to out-coach the other team. He very much was a teacher in some ways, but in terms of the coaching tactical thing, the Bruce Arena, if you will, that wasn't his thing, but it definitely was Oscar's. And by the time we got to the end of that season, we knew we were going in the right direction. I don't think we all saw, the double in 2016 coming, but I don't think any of us were surprised that that's what happened.
So Dallas is back in the playoffs at the end of 2014 for the first time in 2 years. Oscar's had some immediate success. Things are looking bright with the finish at the back of the season. They draw Vancouver in the first round. This is a one-game knockout, if you remember, Kev. Akindelli and Michelle, our friend Michelle that we don't know what to do with, scores the goals to win the game.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember Vancouver being mad that, oh my gosh, it's just a one-off or whatever. It's like, well, play better, be in a better position.
I like the one-off.
I like the one-off too. I mean, I don't know if the NFL structure of one-off alone is the only way to go. I don't know. There's a back and forth to it for me. But in that particular situation where you've got a 4v5, I think it totally makes sense. It's like, who's the bigger dog? Go for it. And I think a lot of FC Dallas fans wanted him to make the playoffs. He did. And was hoping that we would see him have success. We did. So that when we got into that next round, frustrating though that was, it was still, hey, we're going in the right direction. Yeah. We've got the right guy, and this is the right thing.
Well, speaking of the next round is the nemesis of the next decade of FC Dallas, the Seattle Sounders. If Colorado was the nemesis of the previous decade, Seattle is it now, and that's who they get. The first game is at home, and it's a 1-1 draw. Again, Michelle scores a goal for Dallas, and Alonso gets the goal for Seattle. Second leg is back in Seattle, but unfortunately it finishes in a 0-0 draw, and this is insane to me, Kevin. Seattle advances on the away rule with a tie at home, and Dallas is eliminated. What a no chance to go to overtime, no chance for PKs. Nothing. What a bummer of a way to end your season.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways to decide a match. I think the recent thing about the opening game against San Jose in '96, where there was a discussion that, hey, that kind of a shootout in this particular situation is better than just random penalty kicks. So this is kind of the exact opposite, which is, all Seattle has to do is make sure you don't score and then they advance. And that's really not exciting soccer.
No, it is not. Overall, though, 2014, Kevin, super positive season. I think everyone feels great about feels great about Oscar Pereira. And things are moving in the right direction. We feel good about Morrow Diaz when he can be on the field. Things are looking really positive. It looks like they're ahead of schedule in terms of rebuild. So this is the end of your run with us on the History Podcast. So wrap up where we are at the end of 2014 with Oscar. How do we feel about the team? How do we feel about Oscar as the team goes forward from there?
If it's okay, I'm going to come back to that because I'm going to disagree slightly with your statement that we're excited about Morrow.
No?
I don't think even after 2014, we know he can be as great as he will be. We've seen glimpses, we've seen moments, but that thing that he becomes, the midfield maestro, all that stuff, there's still another layer coming. And
well, I agree that he gets better, but I think we all feel pretty good about him, don't we, by 2014? I mean, again, as I said, it's when he's on the field. So he makes
right.
9 starts and plays 17 games and has 3 goals and
Yes.
3 assists. So the
Yes.
signs are there that that he could potentially be, if he can stay healthy now, he could potentially
Yes.
be the cornerstone moving forward. And I think that's where we
Right.
were, at least, and maybe I'm thinking too much in hindsight, but I certainly felt like, I think at the end of Oscar's first season, that he had sort of figured out the core of what he had and what he needed to add into it, and specifically a 6, which we see
True.
coming soon.
Absolutely.
And we feel really good about Oscar in terms of bringing along the youth and knowing what he has and knowing what he needs. And that's what I mean by, I don't think we knew that Diaz was going to be what he would become, but I think we knew that he was a piece that you could make as the revolve your offensive around and be the key piece if he could stay healthy. And that was always going to be the key with him.
Yeah. And I guess that, to me, at least as I recollect 2014, that was my big question, frankly.
Yeah, it is.
Because absolutely, there were signs that he could be phenomenal, but his inability to play consistently, right? It's like he had all of David's skill, but none of his durability.
Yes.
And so, at least as 2014 ended, I was excited that Oscar had done everything that he had. And all of the other things that you said are absolutely true, because you now have a confidence that you've got a coach who can win the coaching battle. You've got players who want to play for him. You've got his knowledge of how those players got to where they are in their careers. There's still a little bit of an issue with red cards that plays into next season, right?
Yeah.
But for the most part, things are going in the right direction. The only other thing, and this is probably the one thing that will frustrate me to no end because of the way things play out, and we can't really go too much into that detail, but I remember thinking, you've got Fabian on the left, you've got Morrow and Michel. If you can get someone who can be on the right that is anywhere near Fabian's ability, so now you're putting pressure on both sides, and you get a real forward, right? Now you have the perfect scenario where it's sort of like, hey, defense, who are you going to try to shut down? You can't make a choice because they're better than what's coming at you, or they're better than what you've got. So that's what I was looking for as I looked into 2015, knowing that there was a lot of skill on the table. I was hoping to see something on the right. Unfortunately, we got that, but didn't keep Fabian. But that's a different story.
That's for the next podcast.
Yeah, so sorry I can't join you for that one.
Yeah.
We're still looking for that target striker, which maybe we get him here with Hara here in a little bit. Really cool. But I do remember feeling like everything was solid and going in the right direction. The one glaring question that I had, the things that I wish were other places, but the one glaring question I had was, can Morrow play a full season?
Yeah.
Can he be that guy that everybody revolves around for a full season? We got some greatness over the next 2 seasons or so, but
the answer turns out to be yes sometimes, but then not sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
All right, Kevin, that wraps up our 2010 to 2014 run. I want to give you one last chance to give me a encompassing career coaching thought on Oscar Pareja, because you've been around for his whole run, of course, and we only got to barely touch on him here. So without going another 45 minutes, what's your wrap up on Oscar Pareja as a coach and what he has meant for this franchise?
Wow.
I know. Don't make it an hour.
Yeah, no, I can't do that, but I do need to take a little bit of time because, when I was a fan in the stands and doing the Inferno thing, he was the player that I cherished the most. He, on his last game, he signed the drumhead that I was playing on, and I took it off and never used it again. And then one of my first jobs when I was working for the team was to take that game ball to him at his retirement party he was having with the Inferno. He's been a part of my fandom and my appreciation of this team from, the moment he got here, from his trade and that amazing game against New York in 1998. And so seeing him, to your point, seeing him be all that for the team as a player, then become a coach and help develop the development academy team, which, again, huge contribution. Both of those are huge contributions. And then to come back and be the coach that gets them to its greatest season ever. I mean, when we do the list of coaches, he's going to be my top. Not just because he won 2026.
Spoiler.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I'm not the only one voting, so he may not be, but it's, if this is me influencing the voters or trying to anyways, it's not just that he won the double in 2016. It's that he built a foundation that can be successful for this team in Major League Soccer for Lucci to just kind of step into. I mean, Lucci's doing his own thing. It's phenomenal. It's unique. But it is built on a foundation that Oscar took when, Schellas had left him with, I mean, I used it earlier, and frankly, I think it's true, an island of misfit toys, that he had to figure out, okay, there's some pieces in here, but how do they fit together? And how do I get this group of players to become a team? He definitely showed how to do that in the modern Major League Soccer.
All right, Kevin, thanks for coming on this podcast, my man. It was terrific. I always enjoy your insight. Even if you and I don't always agree, that's okay. Having different opinions is fine. I'm so glad that you are here to contribute. I really appreciate it. You guys will know Kevin's work from our power rankings we've been doing for 20 years on this website and other contributions, including covering the lower divisions for us and indoor soccer for us. So I hope you all continue to read and enjoy Kevin's work. So Kevin, again, thank you, my friend, for coming on and helping us out.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me. And frankly, it's that not always agreeing, but still having us as a part of a conversation that makes your site great.
Well, thank you, sir. And if you guys enjoyed this podcast, be sure to support us if you feel it's appropriate on patreon.com/third degree. We can always use the help. This is an ad-free podcast. We hope to keep it that way. We hope you like what we do and hope you want to contribute. That's it for today's Third Degree Burn podcast. Our look back at 2010 to 2014. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back soon enough with another podcast, and we'll get into the last 5 years, 2015 up to the current day, with a guest yet to be determined to talk about that era of FC Dallas soccer. That'll come over the next 2 or 3 weeks, hopefully. We hope you'll be back for that. We hope you enjoyed this one today, and we hope to talk to you guys again soon. Thanks for listening.